This was a photograph that I took in Scotland when I was there in June. I did not do a plein air painting of this. We were out to dinner with a class after a long day of painting and just kind of walking to the restaurant. The sun looked great and loved the shadow shape, the little figures sitting there by the wall. There were a few things I needed to kind of work out ahead of time. I didn't really like any of the poles in there. Obviously, this one's kind of ugly and it's right in the center. I didn't want that one, but I kind of went back and forth on this one here. It's not at a good spot where it's right at a tangent with the edge of this building. So if I wanted to include it, I either needed to push it over this way a little bit, which starts to interfere with this, little thing here. Unless I move that over, I can't really push it too far this way either, because then it's getting a little too close to the edge. So I decided to just leave that out. It's rare that you have a photograph that nothing needs to be changed. I didn't really like the fact that the figures were getting a little close to center. Also, I tried to maybe tuck them over to the right a little bit. Not that that's that huge of a deal, but anyways, kind of worked through things. Another thing I had to do on this one, just because I wasn't sure how to tackle this shadow shape. If I kind of wanted to put it in with my darks, but I wasn't quite sure. So I put it in initially, obviously with my middle value here. But then to really show that the shadow side on this building here was in middle value, and obviously the rooftop and everything, I did kind of need to put all this as a darker shape. Didn't really like that little building either. So again, there were some things I had to kind of work through on this one. So I kind of veered off from my normal approach of not finishing the value study just because I wanted to make sure it worked okay with those shadows. So I went ahead and finished it as it was here, and kind of worked off of that this time instead of my normal approach of just doing the middle value and switching gears to the color painting. So another thing I did was kind of squish things together a little bit. I didn't want the side of this building to be too close to the center either, so I made it a little bit more squat than it actually is in the reference photograph. It's a little longer there. Again, a lot of that had to do with moving the figures over. I didn't really like I wanted more of a connection with the shadows here, and this bright wall was kind of separating everything. So I just opened this up into a little kind of a walkway in there and increased some of these shadows in there on my value study to make it a bit more of a connection and kind of showing that dark in there. So I changed the shape of that wall a little bit. I did kind of like this little bush here. But again, it's not very high, so I just practiced maybe making it a little bit higher of a shrub over there. So again, I think it's a really useful exercise to do the value study, to work through some of these things instead of just kind of coming up with a mental checklist that all these things are going to change on your reference photograph, and it's just going to all magically come together on your color painting. So I worked through a lot of these potential things already in my mind's eye on the value study. I had done a couple little drawing things too, just to try and kind of work things out. Going right off, I was going to try and squish this building initially so I could keep that pole in over there. But when I squished it, now this is almost the exact same size as this one. Didn't really like that, and that pushed that even closer to halfway in the middle of the page with the figures. So the little sketch that I did initially, that wasn't happening either. So I just went with the value study and moved the figures further to the right, as you can see, squished this building up a little bit, as you can see, kind of comparing it down to the value study. So all that mental prep work that you do ahead of time really pays off. Okay, here's the drawing on a quarter sheet of Saunders once again. Pretty basic, just the outsides of the buildings, indicated a little bit of where I wanted some of the windows. But all the shadows and things, I don't draw those, I just paint them. Okay, so I know where all my structures are going to be, the wall, and of course the all-important figures. So now I'm wetting the paper. I wet the paper on the back as usual. You may have been, am I going to put anything on here? It wasn't really white paper. It's got a little bit of a warm light on it, so I went ahead, and you can see it's wet right here. I just went ahead and wet the whole paper, and I'll try and avoid that area a little bit, kind of letting some of the surrounding colors bleed into it. But I'm just going to put a very pale kind of a lavender with some raw sienna, kind of a mix on there, a little bit of alizarin crimson too. Very pale, as you can see, very watery. My paper's wet. I've got a big brush there. But I just wanted to tone this area down a little bit, warm it up with that, that sunlight coming in at that time of day is rather warm, right? So I popped that in and I just dropped it over here as well on that wall, just to kind of bounce around, even though I'm probably going to come back there and darken that wall up a little bit anyways. So I did that, and then, yeah, added some more raw sienna and burnt sienna to the mixture. I did wet into all this area here, so I'm trying to kind of paint around him a little bit, but actually, the guy's face has a tone on it. His shirt is going to be darker, so if it bled in there a little bit, that was okay. I think I came back and kind of took a little paper towel wad and dabbed off her shirt a little bit. I wanted her shirt to stay a little bit brighter, and I actually I painted into that, so I kind of lifted that out. But paper's all damp, just big brush, big puddles, okay? And then I add some neutral tint to that raw sienna and burnt sienna mixture, go and gray it down a little bit and get that foreground road in there. The color under the light of the shadows here, that you're seeing on the road, if I turn this off, is it's kind of a warmer color down there. So that's why I kind of stuck to the raw sienna, burnt sienna up here on the wall, and then just added some neutral tint for the area that was going to be underneath the shadow on the road afterwards. So that's what that color is there that I'm knocking in. Okay, going a little bit brighter still, added some quinacridone gold to it and some rose into this. And warming up on the side of that building. Again, that building had quite a bit of warm color on it. I'm going to keep turning off layers here and kind of referring back and forth to the reference photo. But there's warmer color up here on that building that I wanted to get in. So dropping that color in here. And then that color was also reflected into the windows a little bit. You can see on the reference photograph, you're seeing some of those gold colors reflected in the windows. So I wanted to make sure that I'm dropping a little bit of that in there also for later on when I paint around it. Warming up, adding a little bit of cobalt blue into the mixture here, just to kind of dull the color down slightly from the warm gold that I had before. And now I'm putting the roof in, even though that roof is probably going to have another layer on top of it. If you remember on my value study, it was more of a middle value, but I don't paint around anything. Even if it's going to be darker later, include it in this wash. I could put that same color up there on the chimney pots. Okay, now it's time to mix my sky. So remember my initial shape that I painted was the side of that building, and then I did all this other part of the big part of the wash here, and now I'm getting to that sky, which is a lot richer and it's got a lot more color in it. So now when I start painting that sky, I think this has had a chance to actually dry a little bit now, okay? Obviously the chimney pot colors are bleeding in there because I just dropped those in, but hopefully I can start cutting around the chimneys a little bit and that side of the house, and it'll stay that nice kind of a warm pinkish color that I put on initially. I switched to a little smaller squirrel mop brush here also. So I'm just painting around the chimney pots. Again, everything was damp. I just painted those, so you might get some fuzzing going on. But if the consistency of the paint is pretty close and you time it well, those practice exercises that I do to just kind of join one color to the next all the way back in some of the earlier modules, those little stripes and things, it's all about the consistency of the paint. If I mix this blue about the same consistency as the chimney pots, I should have a nice soft edge there, but nothing is going to be, this shouldn't be bleeding way out and causing a bloom. This shouldn't be bleeding way in and causing a bloom. Okay, so a lot of it is just practicing the consistency of your paint. So now when I paint around it, I've got a soft edge, but it's not blooming one into another. All right, I added a little bit of neutral tint to that mixture now. And I got the side of that house, same thing as what you're seeing up by the chimney pots. I just painted around those gold areas of the windows. So there should be kind of a nice soft edge there. Getting a little bit of fuzzing going on here, but I think it's had a chance to dry enough. So that's not too big of an issue. And now I'm going to add some more quinacridone gold and cadmium red into things and get that rooftop in the background, that nice warm rooftop. Everything is still damp. I just painted the sky, so the same thing. I have to make sure the consistency of this is not too runny, so it's going to bleed up and explode into the sky. Last thing I'm going to do is take a small synthetic brush with some of that warmer color and start dropping in some flesh tone on my figures. You can see I did take a paper towel and kind of dab her out a little bit so I can keep her shirt a bit brighter. Going a little bit stronger still with it with that synthetic brush, getting the oranges on the tops of the chimney pots. Okay, a lot more paint in this mixture now with a smaller synthetic brush. It's not as wet as what you're seeing up here when I painted the sky. It's a little bit thicker here now, so it shouldn't be running too much. And there's my light wash. Okay, so when you look at this, I started by filling this in first with that pink. Then I moved down into this area and started filling all that in with the warm golds and things on that wall. Then I started this area up here. I warmed it up even more with some gold and red and filled that in. Let that kind of bleed into this area too, so that all that's filled in here. Then I came up and did my sky, okay, and painted around those chimney pots. The chimney pot was painted the same color and tone as the roof. Lastly, this little area here was that red, and I just kind of bounced that red into a couple little areas in this brick, maybe up in here, the chimney pots, and down into their skin tone a little bit, while everything was still wet with that small synthetic brush. But now, again, everything is covered. Nothing really the white of the paper, even that lady's shirt, because I painted into it and dabbed it off. It's not going to be too bright white. But everything is nice and soft. All this wash is for is getting rid of the white of the paper. Alright, so I'm going to let that dry a little bit, and then I'm going to come back and get my palette looking like this for my middle value wash. Remember, when you do a value study, one big fluid puddle of strong, middle value Payne's gray and connect it all. But on the color version, just getting a variety of color, not just one color Payne's gray. So I'm going to need some more violets and browns and golds and blues, just getting my palette looking like this. So once I start painting that big shape, I can just keep adding, if I need to make this stronger, I can do that. If I need to add some brown into something to dull it down, I can do that. But I've got my palette ready to go, so I don't have to stop and mix, too often in the middle of that shape. I want to keep that bead and just keep reloading my brush. Alright, so I'm going to start up on that rooftop, and you can see already I've changed out of my palette there, the brown, the violet, and the blue. Brown, violet, brown to blue. I'm already changed the color on my brush, 3 times on that little bit of the rooftop. Getting some nice lost edges, painting around the little bit of light up there on that window. Reloading my brush again in that puddle, added maybe some neutral tint to that. Darkening up that side of the building one more time. Again, even though I was going to go over most of this one more time, I didn't leave this white paper. I'm, getting these windows, the reflections, I'm painting around those now, so that's going to work. And now that's dry, I can really start defining the windows, the chimney pots, okay? Just keep reloading my brush, reload, but my paper is dry, so now I have to keep reloading my brush. Switch to the browns, again, lost edge here. Between those buildings, the consistency of the paint was really close, so this isn't blooming into the brown or vice versa. I just have a nice soft edge. And I'm getting the shadow shape in down here along with that rooftop. Remember, from my value study, I decided I was going to have to come in and repaint that shadow here, but I'm just joining it in here right now with this middle value stage of the painting on that rooftop as well. Painting around those chimney pots up above, bringing that down. Remember, I worked through on my value study. I didn't want that solid wall splitting my painting into, so I created that little gap. So now I can carry that down and start bringing that into the foreground. I know it's not a big connection, but it's still, a connection it helps the composition just a little bit instead of having that bright wall separating everything. But look at all the nice little color transitions. Even in this little area, you're seeing some of that blue and violet and brown showing up. Back to that big fluid puddle on my palette. Now you can see, because I've been using that for a while, it's starting to get, a little bit more mixed up with browns and neutral tints and stuff, more into a uniform puddle, but that's okay. Now I'm just kind of getting that nice kind of violet-y blue shadow color, more violet because it's on top of a brown road. And again, not a big connection, but still somewhat of a connection to keep the viewer's eye moving through the painting. Carried on over to the left, leaving some sunspots on the road. Now I'm gonna remember that little shrub. I figured it was better if it wasn't the same height as the wall, so I'm making it just a little bit of a taller tree. So I had to switch to the greens over there. But all of this connected. One continuous shape, changing the color on my brush several times. And tackle the big problems first. I want the figures to be connected. I want this little, doorway to be connected, but don't sacrifice the big for the small, okay? Get the big things working. These are going to be smaller connections, so I'll come back with a smaller brush later and get that in. Now I can come and start, with a natural hair brush and start bringing in what you're seeing of the building through that little doorway. Okay, down now to a synthetic brush, even a smaller brush. Start getting some texture on the wall, some of the dry brush for the stonework and stuff, bringing the figures into that shape. Okay, now we've got a nice big shadow shape on the guy's shirt. That's connected. I know I'm going a little bit darker here with things, but I want the figures, I want to make sure they're connected, so I'm just, even though I got a little bit heavier handed with that, with a darker shape. But a nice big connected middle value shape. Again, I know it's a little darker on the figures. I'm probably still going to have to come down and darken up a couple of those areas. But if you compare that to the shape that I found on my value study, back and forth, almost that same shape. Okay, working through those issues. That photograph had so much going on in that, I wouldn't even know where to begin. That shape I can paint. That was my map, and I just copied it, only changing the colors on my brush several times. That's all. Okay, so there's that big middle value shape. Now's the time for the darks. So going back to that original, value study that I had, see if I can go back to that here. All the way back to the first version. Okay, so I'll keep referring to that. So now I'm painting some of those shapes. The big shadow shape, the rooftop here. So I negatively painted around this little window jutting out, this little skylight window, and the rooftop up there. Even the darks I'm connecting, going right from that into the shadow. It was important that I made that little bend. Another thing I didn't really like from the actual reference photograph here, going all the way back to step one again, is the way that this shadow just ended right at the roof. So I made it a little taller, so they're bending up and over the rooftop a little bit, and I did that on my value study too. But really popping the wall out now with those darker colors. Now I can come in with that synthetic brush and do some work on the windows. Already did a couple little windows over there on the other side. Darkening up my figures even more now that I had the chance to dry. I'm going to darken up her pants a little bit, darkened up the shadow behind that guy's shirt. It was one shape before, but now I wanted his shirt to be a little brighter now that had a chance to dry. And doing a little stonework on the chimneys, all this little stuff at the end. I don't want to make it sound like the details aren't important. They are. Obviously, they bring a lot more definition and life to things, but there's a time and a place for it. Don't worry if you're not getting the stones on the chimneys, while you're trying to paint those big shapes. Same thing on the wall. It felt like they needed a little bit more texture, so now I can come in and do some dry brushing on the wall, create some little cracks, darker cracks and things. I put in these little windows on the side of the building over here, just the shadow side, to kind of show that a little bit, put a little bit of the dark up there on that rooftop line. Okay, just little things here and there, not getting too carried away. But when it's all said and done, I darkened this up in here. That little garbage can needed a dark, a little bit on the road here, just to kind of break up that shadow and show the curb. But again, kind of going back all the way to the reference photograph from the first version. I went a little bit warmer on it again, just because I remember what the light really was like there. A lot of times the photographs tend to cool things off or make it look too blue or whatever. So warmed it up quite a bit. And then obviously my shadows, I have more light in my shadows. Another thing that photos do is they tend to make shadows a bit too dark. So I wanted a bit more life in my shadows. But yeah, it was a fun one. It was a scene that I'd wanted to paint since I got back from Scotland. I knew it would take some work, adjusting a few things and figuring it out. So I thought it would make a good step by step for you to follow along. Hi, my name's Andy Evansen. Over the course of this year, I'll be discussing a lot of ways to improve your paintings with a focus on watercolor in particular. Watercolor is a popular medium, but there are technical issues that can become stumbling blocks during the learning process. Painting becomes a lot more fun once you solve them and can start refining your craft. I'll cover topics that are unique to watercolor, such as painting wet and wet, the timing and consistency of your washes, the importance of drawing and negative shade making, and more. I'll also be talking a lot about how vital it is to have a plan. Transparent nature of watercolor means you're limited in the amount of fixing you can do once you've started, and indecisiveness, that's what leads to the weak, muddy paintings. Because this course spans a calendar year, you'll be able to see me painting outdoors on location as well as in the studio. We can talk about the differences and similarities of both. I've taught dozens of 3 to 5 day workshops, and most of the time, just as students are starting to figure things out, it's time to say goodbye. This course through Tucson Art Academy Online allows me to work with you for an entire year, so we'll be able to get into things that just aren't possible in a 4 day workshop. As an artist who also loves to teach, I'm really excited about the possibilities of this. I hope you'll join me.